Well, welcome to Round the Table, live with Christian Concern. And today we're talking about DIY abortion. Is it here to stay? And I'm delighted to be joined by special guest Rachel Mackenzie of Rachel's Vineyard today, and also by Michael Phillips, one of the top lawyers at the Christian Legal Centre. Hey, great to see you guys. Thanks for joining us today. Rachel, why don't you start by just telling us a bit about your ministry and what you actually do?
Yeah, okay. So my name is Rachel from Rachel's Vineyard, but that's just a coincidence. Rachel's Vineyard came from America, and we support anybody that's affected and traumatized by abortion. So that can be the mother, the father, grandparents, siblings, and also people that work in the abortion industry when they suddenly realise, oh my gosh, I've been involved with killing. Where do we go from there? So we support people.
Well, it's interesting to hear, the father and the grandparents as well as, so it's not just the mother kind of thing. Most people won't recognise that or realise that.
Yeah. I mean, so many people say, that this is a woman's choice, but, where's the father in this? What about the father's role? And it's so important. And I know that, from my own experience, many people have abortions because of the lack of the man's role, and it's just as important. And it really impacts them. It impacts the whole community, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, great. Well, we'll look forward to hearing more from you in a minute. And Michael, thanks for joining us. Just recap for us, Michael. How do we get into this position where this policy of, we're calling it DIY abortion or pills by post abortion, became legal in this country?
Yeah. So I think what's happened is that over the years, abortion has moved from something that only took place in an NHS hospital to something which became increasingly medicalized. So it was no longer just a surgical procedure. It was possible to have it by the ingestion of these two pills. So that you take this first pill and that effectively kills the fetus, and then you have the second pill which kind of washes it out, what's the remaining products of conception, as it's euphemistically known. And so these medical developments have occurred over the years, and really the law has been in a position where it's had to play catch up. I mean, the fact is that the law remains as it is from 1967. However, because of the advent of these new procedures, there have been campaigners for many years who've tried to push pills by post through the courts, and then latterly they saw their opportunity at the start of COVID, and they said, no, this is our opportunity to really push forward this particular method of abortion. And this was despite all the misgivings that senior members of government, so Matt Hancock and Lord Bethell in Parliament, had real serious concerns about what this might mean. But nonetheless, it did go through. And it didn't go through, there was no vote of Parliament, it didn't go through the House of Lords. All that happened is that there was effectively a statement by the Secretary of State, Matt Hancock, he was at the time, and who just simply said that you can now have your abortion at home, and that is considered lawful under the 67 Act.
And it was kind of in the depths of we're just going into the first lockdown, and people were not leaving their homes apart from for very emergency reasons or whatever, and that was kind of the rationale for it, wasn't it? It was stay home, save lives. But if you want to end your life, end a life inside you, we'll send you pills to help you do that. Was kind of the rationale, wasn't it? And it was kind of an emergency measure, Michael. But here we are. What, more than a year later? I mean, I'm approaching 2 years. It will be in March later. How come we're still in this position when obviously clinics are open, everyone's back to work, and all that kind of, and yet we still got this so-called emergency measure in place?
Because it was really all a bunch of hooing. That's really what we have. I mean, we were told that it was an emergency measure, and as soon as the pandemic is over, then don't worry about it, we'll just go back to normal. But that has not happened at all. The fact is that there were campaigners for years putting pressure on the civil servants, and putting pressure, and the civil servants in turn putting pressure on the ministers, and that's what they wanted. They tried to change the law through the courts, it didn't work, and then they saw an opportunity, and then within a few steps, from campaigner to civil servant to junior minister to number 10, it all happened in the blinking of an eye, because they had their plan ready. And so there is no intention, the campaigners do not wish matters to be rolled back to the situation as it was 2 or so years ago. They do not want it.
No, they don't. But we did a legal challenge on the decision here. Do you want to talk about that as well, Michael?
Yeah, so we saw that this was really effectively the biggest change in abortion law since 1967. Yeah. And so as a result, democracy, whatever your views are on this issue, the fact is that democracy had been supplanted in all of this. So we said, well, this isn't right. It's a matter for judicial review. So judicial review is a mechanism whereby you can go to court and you can say, the government have done this wrong and it's not lawful. And that's what we did. We went to the High Court. We were given permission. We had a day's hearing in front of 2 very senior judges. And then they gave their judgment and they ruled in favor of the government. And then we then appealed to the Court of Appeal, which is the second highest court. Likewise, they agreed to hear the case. But again, they sided with the government. And it just so happened that 2 of the judges who were hearing the case had also heard a very similar, well, not entirely similar, but an abortion case involving the Ealing buffer zone, which they had ruled in favor of Ealing Council. So there was an element of, well, it seems as though we knew which way the courts were going to be going, even really from the first 5 minutes of the hearing. So it was very sad, not just in relation to the children, in relation to the women, but also concerning democracy, that really Parliament had been bypassed in that way.
Yeah. So, and Rachel, you're at sort of the coalface of this, and you're seeing the impact on the ground. Tell us what you've seen the impact of this kind of pills by post system.
Well, I don't even know where to begin with the serious concerns. I mean, people will, immediately say, well, what's the difference? Home, the abortion centre. I know we call it clinic. I don't. If I go to a clinic, I get well. I've never been well since I went to the abortion centre. But there's no blood test done. There's no scan. How do we know if it's an ectopic pregnancy? We'll never know the week's gestation until you actually get medical supervision and help on that. And when I think of certain people that I know that have been through Rachel's Vineyard will call me absolutely traumatised. When the legal age is 9, you can have an abortion with these pills at home, 9 weeks, 6 days. And yet people have had it well over 10, 11, weeks. So I'm sure there was... in the Mail last year, somebody at 20 odd weeks that had it. Yeah. Just staring at them. So there's nobody to see that they are taking them. And for me, I think one of the absolute horrors is, how do you know the identity of the person that's ringing? How do we know that, Rachel Mackenzie, who's on that phone, is really Rachel Mackenzie just because you've given a name? And how do you know that person that's going to get the pills is the one that's going to take them? Are they being forced into it? Are they being coerced? Or are they being, is this for a child in the family? A very young teen that's been abused by a family member? All that's being covered up through these DIY abortions. And that's what really horrifies me. And I know that BPAS say, well, isn't this great that, the time limit's gone down? But actually what you've done there is you've took time out. You've taken time out to really consider and think about your options. So in the end, you just think you've got one choice. And as we know, one choice is no choice. And they're just some of the horrors that, that really concern me. And let alone, I mean, there's no need for a GP. There's no need for NHS numbers. And therefore people think, well, okay, it doesn't matter about an NHS number. But then you can't, have that trail, we used to have paper trails at school, but a medical trail. To know that, years later, when you've got complications, you've got all these, gynae problems, and it's actually down to the abortion, but that's not on your records. It's frightening.
Yeah. So, and we've actually seen some mystery client surveys were done, weren't they? Where people phoned up and gave fake names and fake addresses and fake GP registrations and no NHS data and a fake gestation. They weren't even pregnant and so on. And the tablets were still sent out. So there's absolutely no control, like you're saying, Rachel, of any of this. And anybody can basically just obtain tablets whenever they want to, as long as they've got a female voice, basically, when that's all that's required here, isn't it?
Absolutely. And when you think about, there's a big campaign at the moment with domestic violence, that you've only got to go into a shop and either say, Annie, order this. How can you do that on a phone call? How can you actually say, that you need help? So many people have abortions because they felt isolated, and now you've isolated them even more. They can't get the help because they're stuck in the house.
Yeah.
And
So
that
listen,
was exactly the concern that the government had. They said that we are not going to be changing the law. They were asked repeatedly, are you going to be changing the law? And they said no, because we are so concerned that adverse pressure could be put on these women. There are many different scenarios that we can think of, cultural scenarios, especially where there's a great shame in a family who've got a young girl who was pregnant from her boyfriend, and it's just easier to have an abortion. She may not want to have an abortion. And how are we as a society protecting that woman? We're not, And so as a result, on the one hand, the government's, singing this song about protecting women and looking after them and being tough on domestic violence and so on. But at the same time, the most vulnerable state you can imagine a young woman being in, forced effectively to kill her own child. There's no protection. The protection that there was effectively is removed. That she could go into a clinic and somebody could spot, hey, hang on a second, uncle, brother, or whoever it seems to be frog marching her in here. But that just cannot happen anymore.
Yeah. And when I think of Kirsty, she talks about when she made the phone call, you could actually even hear it in her voice, the tremors and the fear in her voice. And it wasn't picked up because people just want to get to the next call. Yeah, and it's also very frightening when we hear the word, counsellor, and they use that against us. If anybody's outside an abortion centre, you're not real counsellors, and yet the people on the phone, they're not real counsellors. They're not doctors
either.
Absolutely,
Yeah, and the 1967 Act was very clear about the protections that it was going to be given to women. So first of all, 2 doctors have to sign it off, and then the abortion has to be performed by a doctor. So those were the safeguards they put in all those years ago. And now we are in a situation where they had to invent a legal fiction that, in fact, the reason why the pregnant woman is able to administer this to herself is because she's part of the medical team. And just as much as a nurse is, or a paramedic, or a midwife, she is actually just part of the medical team. And that is the fiction that had to be created in order to allow this just to sail through. And that is just wholly disingenuous.
Yeah. And I know that, when you think about any procedure, medical procedure, I can't stand that when they use that for abortion, because it's the only surgery or only procedure where for it to be a success, somebody has to die. But just putting that aside, not that you can, that with every abortion that somebody dies, but if it's a procedure, there would be such an outcry if dentists suddenly went, you need a crown filling, so I'm going to give you these, give you all the instruments, go home, look in the mirror and do it yourself. Can you imagine the outcry? But with this procedure, which obviously we know, even if you didn't know that it kills a child, for many, you're about to find out that it does, because you're going to see the reality in your own house.
Well, and I want to play a video showing that in a minute. But just if you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook, we can see your comments there. And thank you for commenting. We've got a couple of questions here. Heather Scammell, first of all, asking whether more babies were aborted during the pandemic than died of COVID or any other cause. Well, that's right, isn't it? The leading cause of death last year and the year before in the whole world was abortion by a long, long way, far in excess of COVID. So that's definitely the case. But then she asked another question. Do we have hard data as to what percentage of home abortions required subsequent hospital treatment? And we do.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that, Rachel?
Yeah, so I know that, with the Freedom of Information Act, that people collected this information. And 1 in 17 of women that have had home abortions ended up in hospital. So this isn't rare. This isn't a rare, just a little problem that's going to, rarities. Isn't it? Shouldn't it be 10,000 or 100,000 for something to be rare? 1 in 17 end up in hospital. And out of that 17, 8 end up having to have a surgical, surgery to put right what's happened. And that's just the physical side. I'll go on later about, the psychological impact of this.
And ambulance calls are up, is it 3 times for women taking these pills than it was relative to in clinic as well. So, huge rises in there. And it's just not a safe treatment. It's not like, a rare complication lands you in hospital. 1 in 17 is common, right? It's nothing like what you'd get from drugs you can get over the counter in a pharmacy. It's nothing like most of the drugs your doctors prescribe you. Very very few drugs are so dangerous that 1 in 17 people end up in a hospital, and yet these drugs are like that, is kind of thing, isn't it? Let's now play a 2-minute video just of a couple of women who've had taken these pills, just so you can see the effect it had on them. So if we can do that, that'd be great.
All I can do is repeat the clarity that there are no proposals to change abortion law.
I kept the pregnancy a secret to myself. I didn't tell anybody.
We weren't going to keep the child. But I know as time went on, and then I was in a weird way, I kind of felt this attachment and this love for my child that I didn't even know.
We have the option of pills, which we could either send you by post or you could collect them from a clinic.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a preference?
Would it be possible to send the tablets by post?
What we have here are the set of pills, and these have arrived from BPAS. Now, you requested these pills. You're not pregnant.
No.
You didn't give your real name.
No.
Okay.
I wasn't offered any sort of pre-appointments, such as a scan, to see how far gone I was and whether this procedure would be safe.
I don't know why they didn't stop me. Like, they couldn't see that was hurting. I felt like so alone during that whole pregnancy, but that was hard. That night was so hard. I remember just saying, I'm sorry.
I took the final part of the medication on a Monday, and I just remember lifting up my blanket and it being like a scene out of a horror movie. I was left really heavily bleeding for months afterwards.
It wasn't like a heavy period. And like I looked down and I just looked up and I can't look anymore. It's a child, it's not, do you know what I mean? Like a bit of blood.
The at-home abortion is being made to make you think that you're doing it in the comfort of your own home without, having to travel to a clinic or a hospital. But then you've got the memory of the loss of your child in your own home forever. So now, to me, my home's not my home, my happy, safe place. It's the place where it took away my child.
Well, that's quite disturbing viewing, isn't it, really? But the point is that that's the reality for women that, Rachel, you are involved in helping, isn't it?
Yeah, and when I think of Kirsty and Natalia, because they both came to Rachel's Vineyard, that video is just like a drop in the ocean of the pain that they've suffered. That was after, a lot of healing and a lot of time. Before it was even worse, and I know that I pray outside abortion centres, and I was actually praying for the third lot of 40 days when I turned around and realised that's where I had my abortion. Because when you're so badly traumatised, you can't remember, where your abortion was. But on the other hand, you can have triggers. So I know a lot of people that can't actually drive past the abortion centre where they had their abortion, and they will drive miles to get home without having to go past that road, because that they know that's where they lost their child. And like Kirsty said, my place of safety is no longer safe, and so now her trigger is where she lost her baby. The shower is a massive trigger for her, the carpet that still has the blood on. And then when I think of Natalia, and Natalia's, she speaks quite openly about this. And anybody that I talk about, I've obviously got permission, because what happens at Rachel's Vineyard stays there. But Natalia, she looked down and she saw Isaiah, and she knows, she wears that beautiful silver thing that says Isaiah, her child's name. And she can't unsee that. And she'll never, she was in her bed for 3 days, hemorrhaging the amount of blood that she lost. And she won't even, lots of people, very kind people, have offered to buy her a new mattress. But obviously Rachel's Vineyard wanted to buy her a new mattress, but she doesn't want one, because she said, this is all I've got left of my child, and it's the only grave I've got. And she's also, aware that, that Isaiah, did go down into the sewers. And that's the reality and the horror. And where's the dignity there, for her child and for her?
Yeah, well, it's shocking and disturbing stuff. We've got a question here from Christina Spivey on Facebook. Do they provide post-counselling for the woman who regretted after the abortion? Michael, I'm going to go to you on that. And maybe you want to talk about Dermot.
Yeah, well, this is what they say, that, we are the full service. We're like a department store. We give you everything. But in reality, the actual evidence that we've been able to gather in concerning another case was no. I'm not saying that if you contact them and you specifically ask for it and you chase for it, then possibly maybe they might refer you on somewhere else. But the evidence that we have received from women who've been through this process, who've got the first pill and who've then changed their mind, is that it's basically, that's it. You get the pills and they're done with you. That has been their experience. So it seems
they don't only say, goodbye. They also say, you've got problems, call the ambulance, call somebody else. Don't call us. It's not our problem anymore. We've discharged you. It's actually like that, isn't it? They sort of discharge you, and you're no longer their problem anymore. If you've got any problems, go to someone else. It's actually the attitude, isn't it?
Well, that's it. I mean, it's a fixed fee. So you get a fixed fee for that. And, you're not going to be getting any extra money if you give them a bit of counseling. So why would you? Because ultimately this is, I think ostensibly these organizations are charities, but at the same time, they seem to, there's not going to be any extra money for counseling. So there's no incentive on them. But certainly the evidence that we have gathered would suggest that there is a real lack of care for these women. And that is the most disturbing thing.
Yeah.
I think also that if you regret your abortion, it's often that you regret it because you know that your child has died. Why would you want to go to the people that helped you kill your child? So you're not going to want to go there. And then the few that do go and do ring up and say, I've committed murder, I've killed my child, they are told, look, this is legal. Of course you haven't. It's a blob of cells. One woman who said, I know it had a heart. And she was told, you haven't, your child, your fetus didn't have a heart. It was a blob of cells with a pump. So these are the lies that they're being fed. But those lies, it might be a plaster for a little bit, but then, then it comes out later on. It can come out decades later.
It's awful. And what about Dermot, though, Michael? Because some of these women, and we've had these testimonies, they take the first pill, immediately regret, and look for help. And, is there anything I can do to save this baby having taken this tablet? And some of them found this chap, Dermot, online, didn't they? Do you want to talk about that, Michael?
Well, the answer is that, there is a treatment which has been used for many, many years in relation to miscarriages, where you have a prescription of progesterone and you take it, and as a result of that, there is a chance, I think it's about a 50-50 chance then, that you may be able to save your pregnancy, which is fantastic. And I think in certain states in America, it's a mandatory requirement of abortion providers that they give that information out to the women if they go through the procedure. But in this country, it's a relatively new thing, and there were a couple of doctors who decided that they would offer this on a pro bono basis, completely free of charge. And so women go onto the internet, they found that they've made a dreadful mistake, and they Google, what can I do in this situation? And they came across this one website in America, contacted, and within a matter of minutes, there was a Scottish doctor and also Dr. Dermot Kearney, who were able to help and speak to the women, find out what's going on, and give a private prescription. And as a result of that, there are 31 people alive today in this country that would not otherwise be alive today. And so it seemed fantastic. But as a result of what was going on, there was a complaint made by an abortion provider, Dr. Stephen Lord, that this was all very unethical to the General Medical Council. They brought interim proceedings, and at this point in time, there is an order that Dr. Kearney cannot do that anymore. And also the other lady, Dr. in Scotland, she's not able to do it as well. So theoretically, actually, you can still do it, but you've got to find a doctor. And probably it's a private gynecologist, Harley Street, who may be able to do something like this, but they certainly don't advertise for it. And you've got to have a large amount of money in those circumstances. But I don't know of any other doctor who is doing it in this country anymore since Dermot has been prohibited from doing it.
And Michael, you're trying to help him, aren't you, to get that overturned and challenge that decision, which is probably makes him the first doctor in the UK to be prohibited from giving a life-saving treatment, isn't it?
I mean, it's just, you just say it like that, and you think, well, how does this make any sense? How does it make any sense? Because it doesn't. You know, the fact of the matter is that there is an ideological war going on, and there are some people who get caught in the crossfire, and those people are doctors like Dr. Kearney, but also the women and the children who change their minds, which a lot of people do. And so as a result of that, there is going to be a hearing in the High Court, and we're going to seek to argue that really he should be able to continue this very important work.
Well, we'll pray for that, the success of that. So, Rachel, coming back to you. So the government actually, having said this is an emergency measure, then said, right, we're going to do a consultation on whether to make it permanent. And that consultation closed, I think, a year ago, isn't it? February last year. Yeah. So where are we at now, Rachel?
You know, it's just that it just boggles my mind that, you know, that. But the problem, I think, is that the evidence that they were given, all the people that, you know, fed back to them, it was very positive towards us. I think it was 7 out of 8 GPs have serious concerns about, you know, DIY abortions. Yeah. And yet we've had no feedback from them. It's like, well, we'll just ignore that because that doesn't fit our agenda. It's incredible. And that thing about, you know, about like Dr. Dermot, you know, because when I had my surgery to end the life of my children, when I woke up, and often women say, you know, they tell me when they wake up screaming. You know, I didn't. I woke up and I was nothing but relieved. You see, I had a problem. I didn't want to be pregnant and I didn't want to be a mum. So I had an abortion. But now I know that abortion doesn't end the problem. It just makes me a mother to dead children. And that's what I have to live with today. But that's the reality and the truth. But at least with these horrendous demonic tablets, when you've taken them, you can think, what have I done? The reality is there. It's not too late. So why is the abortion industry so against that? Because they don't want people to say that they regret it. When you think about the turnaround, there was a turnaround, I can't think of the word I'm looking for now, that they did a turnaround survey, and, you know, the majority of people are really relieved after an abortion. Go and ask them 5 years later. Go and ask them 10 years later, when they're, you know, they're grieving in so many different ways, and many of them don't even know that they're grieving, but they're acting out in certain ways. Go and ask them if that's what they think now. Yeah.
So, listen, so we're still waiting for a response to that consultation and what the government policy is. But interestingly, British Pregnancy Advisory Service, BPAS, announced on Twitter that the government's decided to make this permanent and allow DIY abortions to be a permanent measure introduced for an emergency. The government has not confirmed that. In fact, the government has stated that no announcement has been made and they're still thinking about it. But it's interesting that BPAS felt strong enough to say, thank you, the government, for deciding this. I hope they're wrong. But
they probably know better than what we do. I mean, I think the thing is that these people have an inside track. When they decided to bring in this change, they didn't ring up Rachel's Vineyard and say, we're thinking about changing this. You know, what do you think? No pro-life organization was consulted. And we know that from the disclosure. And so that is the sad thing about this, that, you know, the civil servants, along with the campaigners, along with the junior ministers, effectively had this conversation without the input of people such as Rachel's. And so it's you know, it's a proper disgrace. You know, it is just, there is no way that this should have happened in this way, because valuable voices are being silenced as a result.
And what's really sad is BPAS aren't doing it for, you know, for the good of women. It's because they no longer need the abortion centres. They no longer need the staff. So they're saving money. So their profit margins, this is all about money. And I think that's what's really frightening. This isn't about the most vulnerable in society at all. It's got nothing to do with that, because actually the most vulnerable are the isolated, are the ones in domestic violence, sex trafficked, the children that are abused, and we're not looking out for them.
Yeah. So listen, we've sent an email around saying write to your MP this week, because I don't think it is the case the government's definitely made this decision yet, but it clearly is close to making a decision, because if BPS putting out things like that. So we're saying write to your MP, tell them to tell Sajid Javid, don't make this permanent. It's an emergency measure. It's time to call an end to it and say time's up on this. It's not safe. It's not good for women. It's not protecting the vulnerable. All of those kind of things, because we need to up the pressure on it, and that's why we've chosen to focus on it as well in this live stream round the table podcast today as well. But somebody's asking here, Michael, probably a question for you. Is there a custodial sentence? Shalom Olivia Hare asks, is there a custodial sentence if a woman has been forced to terminate by the abuser? Presumably there is. That would be an offence, would it not?
Yeah, I mean, it's in theory, if you have somebody who forces somebody else to take an abortion pill when they don't want to do so, that's a serious injury to themselves. So theoretically, that person could have proceedings brought against them for under the Offences Against the Person Act for grievous bodily harm. Never seen it in practice, that said, but I know that there have been cases in the past where this is the real contradiction in the law, that if a woman wants her own child to die, then it's not murder. Not infanticide is nothing. It's just an abortion. However, if, for example, somebody went up to that woman and assaulted her, as a result, she died and the baby died, you could be facing two charges of one of infanticide and one of murder. So the legality or the status, the legal status of the person in the womb entirely consists of whether the mother wants it to live or not. Which is just, think about that just for a second. Just imagine if your life was only a life if somebody else considered that you were alive.
Yeah.
So, it is, we end up in these ridiculous legal situations because of the fact that we've moved so far away from really first principles. And first principles, as from the Bible, but also in our own law, was that you do no harm, you preserve life at all costs.
Yeah. Well, look, there is some guidance on our website for writing to your MP. Do encourage you to do that today. christianscustodial.com/stop-DIY-abortion, and you'll find some guidance on how to write to your MP there. So I would encourage you to do that. Obviously, this is something that needs to be changed. Do tell other people about this. Let them know. It's like somebody was saying in the comments, how come people don't know that there's 1 in 17? How come people don't know how dangerous it is, and the numbers of people that end up in hospital and so on, and also the massive psychological effect that it has. We just need this to be known, and more people to talk about it, and more people to say to the government, we need to stop this. And that's basically where we need to go with this. Listen, thank you so much for joining us, everyone, watching and listening as well. Thank you, Rachel, especially for joining us and your really powerful stories that you've got to share. Really appreciate your ministry and what you're doing. And thank you, Michael, as well. And we'll be praying for Dermot's case as well in the mix of this. Thank you, and look forward to catching up with you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you.